Beyond the obvious, and today I have my special guest, innovating leadership and team development, creator of teamwear and a team flow architecture, equipping people know navigate complexity and change without burning out. No other than Mr. Shaun Mader.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you,
Well,
Daniel.
welcome back, Mr. Shaun, to one of my podcasts. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I missed?
Sure. My name is Shaun Mader. I'm based here in New York City, and I work on developing intelligence amongst teams, working with leaders, individual teams to show them new ways to, I guess, in one sense, just make their lives easier and get more done with less effort. But that gets into probably some of the topics we're going to talk about today.
Indeed, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Shaun. Thank you. Yes, we have a lot of crowds. Mr. Shaun, they love you. So let's talk about what modern teams actually need from their leaders and why most development programs are not addressing it. So tell us. You argue that most leadership tools give you yesterday's news when you need tomorrow's intelligence. Annual surveys reporting disengagement 6 months ago, exit interviews after talent has already left. When did you last discover a team problem for too late? And what would you have been different if you'd seen it coming?
Yeah, so that gets at something that we just saw over and over is that oftentimes by the time a person left a company, they would have the exit interview, and only then would the real insights come. That things had been going wrong for months before that, that people were dissatisfied or had already turned off. And a lot of times, what it was is there were certain things that had made the employee feel like they weren't valued, that their input didn't matter. But if you've ever been in a job, sometimes we stay in there because we're more interested in job security or waiting for that next thing to happen. And what we started to see is if you looked across a team, you had this mix of people who were really focused and moving things forward, and some people had one foot out the door. And it doesn't necessarily show up in a profit and loss statement, but that was causing an incredible cost to the company, an incredible emotional and work toll on the leader and the team members. So the real challenge was, well, how would you get ahead of this? And what you start to see is these humanistic principles that we talk about were missing in a lot of these situations. People were having disagreements or interpersonal things or not having certain needs met that were not unreasonable, that could have been solved, that could have been salvaged. So we started to build a process of asking people questions proactively to surface these things ahead of time and give people the tools to be proactive instead of having to clean up the mess for when everything goes wrong.
Hmm, interesting. Mr. Shaun, you contrast scattered observations creating management by intuition with systemic intelligence creating management by insight. Looking at your current visibility into team dynamics, are you operating on intuition or insight? And how would you know the difference?
It's a really good question. I think when we talk about organizational intelligence or collective intelligence is another term we use, our brains are conditioned to automatically think toward things like data and getting better ways of looking at things that are out there in spreadsheets or in how we're constructing things or our customer data. And while that is beneficial, we found that what's right in front of us and what is actually most important is the insight and the intelligence and the ideas and the relevant knowledge that a company needs right there in its people who are interacting with your customers, who are interacting with each other. But that's not considered organizational intelligence. And if we even think that that is considered organizational intelligence, we really lack the means to actualize that potential. And so we found that we can be very effective at getting that insight out of people when you engage them in a regular process of inquiry and asking questions and working with leaders. And you can train people's attention into these, what we call meta themes. These, like, how are we working on our work? How are we functioning as a team? What are the things that prevent us from being our best? Oftentimes, these are questions that are never asked, but when they're put inside of a practice with people, suddenly people start to wake up to, oh my God, we have a lot of things in our way that we don't address. We have processes that are missing, or we have old processes that get in our way, and I waste 15% of my time each week doing this. When you start to engage people's attention around these fundamental questions, it creates a fundamental shift that's very profound. It takes people from being passive in their environment at the effect of something that leadership gave to them, and suddenly makes them active participants in the solutions. And we find that people become very active in shaping the business when we take that approach.
So, Sean, the gap between the leaders' need and what they typically get represents, in Mader's view, or on your view, one of the greatest untapped opportunities in business. If you could design an early warning system for your team's health, what would it tell you that you currently can see?
Well, that was actually one of the inspirations that was the start of our design of team flow architecture. There were a couple situations going on with clients. One of them was frustrated because some new crisis emerged. Sometimes these were in the public eye. And her comment was, I should have known about this a month ago. Why didn't anybody bring this to me? We could have handled it back then if we would have only known. And I think a lot of people in leadership positions have situations like that. So that was one question. Well, how would you find that out? That was the beginning of us putting questionnaires out to people. And it literally went out to the team. What are the things we should be focusing on now that if we don't address them could become a crisis later? And people would just told you. They said, oh, I've got this situation. I've got this. And suddenly there was an open dialogue about it. In another company, they were emerging from a bankruptcy, which has a lot of imposed conditions. So people have been working under tough conditions to pull through those various stages. And when we began to put team flow architecture into place, the team lead said, people have been really stressed out, and I'm concerned for them. I want to know how they're doing, but I really haven't gotten around to it. So one of the questions I put early on in our team flow architecture cadence was saying exactly that. Everybody's been going through a lot. You've all been working really hard. I want to check in to see how your stress levels are doing. Would you tell me on a scale of 1 to 10 what they are? And if there's anything I can do to support you. And in the answers, somebody reported that they were at a stress level of 9 out of 10. And so I asked the boss, I said, what did you do when you saw that? He says, oh, I went and spoke to her right away. I said, well, what happened? And he said, the first thing she said is, thanks so much for even asking. And we went on to talk, and I got to find out what she was dealing with, and she kind of calmed down even right there in the moment. But he said she came back to me later that day and said, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. And she said, I think I create a lot of that stress myself. And I'm going to go to work on that. But thank you so much. That conversation was really helpful. Now, think of what that does to just the relationships and the way that opens up new conversations when somebody really had been at a stress level of 9 out of 10. And I'll add one piece to that story. A couple months later, I was on a coaching call with the team, and that same woman who had been at a stress level of 9 out of 10 revealed that she begun, and she was a little worried that I'd be upset. She said, "Hey, Shaun, um, is it okay that I've been taking those questions that you send out every week and I've been giving them all to my team?" And of course it was, but it was because she saw the value of taking that bit of time out each week to focus, to zoom out and look at how we are working and looking at the patterns that we might not normally address. And she just saw that it was so easy to extrapolate that onto her team, and that just became an internal practice from there on out.
Mr. Sean, let's consider two scenarios. A problem dedicated in 9 months after an exit interview costing 50,000 to 150,000 US dollars versus the same problem detected in 2 weeks through systemic intelligence. What expensive problems are you currently waiting to discover rather than preventing?
Yeah. Well, that number you're giving, I think, is pointing to, generally speaking, the cost of losing an employee is often 2 to 3 times that person's salary. So if you think about it, if you're going to bring somebody on, first you might have to headhunt or go whatever hiring process there is, then you have to onboard them. Then it's about 6 months before you can really tell if they're a really good fit for the role, because it just takes people time to get used to a system. And then if you lose that person, let's say it's within the first year and a half or 2 years, which is really common, especially amongst younger generations, all of that investment is now gone and you have to start that process over again. Now, there's a huge financial cost to that. But additionally, there's an incredible strain on the remaining team members who have to pick up the slack, who never feel like they've got enough people working together who actually have enough knowledge and have established enough ways of working together. So if you start to see, it's an entire ecosystem effect that is much more, and it's costing the company much more than just that replacement cost, which is already steep. You're talking about how the other people might be burning out or being too stressed, or it's just one crisis too many and they're going to leave at some certain point, or they became disengaged because they're finally fatiguing after so many rounds of this. Our perspective is we can't control everything, but we can absolutely make a massive improvement on the kinds of conditions that people operate in. And you have to have an ongoing conversation about that so that people are engaged with their work. They're seeing new patterns, they're developing. And when there are concerns and when there are breakdowns, that they have developed amongst themselves the means to handle them in a productive way. That way, you get people to stay on the team longer. You have more of the intellectual and institutional knowledge with you longer. You have a better return on your investment for hiring, and you get better productivity out of your team members with that approach.
Very well said, Mr. Sean. So, can you describe the essential shift from being the smartest person solving problems to being the architect of a collective intelligence? What should it take for you to trust that your team could solve problems without your direct intervention?
Yeah. Um, we find that people get promoted because they're good at their job, as they should. But then they find themselves in a leadership position, and oftentimes they've never been given the training to move from a great individual performer to a completely different mindset shift, which is how do I get performance out of other people? And everybody's a little different on this, of course, but generally what we find is people in leadership positions suffer from a couple background issues, one of which they oftentimes feel that they have to know the answer. That if they don't have the answer, it's going to make them look like they're not prepared, or they're doing something wrong, or they look weak. And that's an incredible burden to have that expectation that this one brain could have all the answers. And when people are under that mindset, we find if we actually look at their language, they spend a lot of time explaining things to people, a lot of times telling people things. And what that does is it inadvertently trains the other team members to become passive. They're not active participants in the problem solving. So, what we work with leaders on is to master the art of asking questions. Because when I start to ask you questions, you have to do the mental labor. You have to envision something. You have to problem solve. You have to bring your influences and skills to bear. So when we talk about what it takes to architect collective attention and collective intelligence, neurologically speaking, I'm really talking about taking all the burden of expecting this one mind to do all the work and activate the intelligence of all the team members to the best degree. And what that ends up doing is it moves me from being the person who has to know it all and control everybody and produce the results to moving me into more of a coaching position. Because as I ask the questions, I'm starting to hear how that person thinks, how they're processing, what they know, or what they might be missing that I can supply them with. And suddenly now I have a lot more bandwidth as the leader to get the most out of each person while freeing myself up to do the more strategic thinking that I know I need to do.
So, Sean, you identify a profound paradox. Leaders gain more influence by exercising less direct control. Where in your work are you clinging to control that, if released, might actually increase your impact?
Yeah, it's a little bit related to what we're just talking about. There's a lot of pressure on people. There's a lot of pressure to produce results. There's a lot of pressure to stay on top of things. And as we know, the world itself is changing very quickly as well, geopolitically, technologically, the uh, ways of working, the way that technology is impacting what is more important now versus what it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. So if a person is attempting to control all of this, I'll just say this bluntly, you're probably making your team members miserable. But a lot of high performers got into those positions because they were really good at producing those results. So what we often find is there's a personal crisis for the leader. And it takes something to let go of old ways of doing things. So I use the analogy of, if the conditions out there are becoming really volatile, if people don't have this acronym, it's an acronym called VUCA, VUCA. It's a term invented by the military. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so if the conditions that you're operating in are volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous, one person trying to control a bunch of people becomes a very high stress and situation and a recipe for burnout. And we think about this kind of like a whitewater rafting team. If I just put a bunch of people into a raft and send them out into the rapids and I hope for the best, it's not going to go very well. One person's going to pop out and fly out the second we hit rapids. You'll have people screaming to be heard, but nobody can hear. And at a certain point, you start losing the amount of people who can help you chart the river to get downstream. But if you look at a rafting team who's experienced, you will see that a lot of the work happened before they ever got into the water. They establish the ways that they're going to communicate when things get loud or when they get turned sideways. You would not see one person in that boat screaming at people, expecting them to suddenly coordinate, or that one person was going to take over and suddenly correct that ship. You need to have the protocols in place and the ways that we're going to operate under difficulty agreed upon and practiced amongst the people if you want to be a rafting team that gets to the end. So we find that it's counterintuitive that by training people to release control is not passive. It's not like just giving it over to people and not touching it. It's actively curating the intelligence and the ways of operating amongst all team members so that it's a shared responsibility.
Very well said, Mr. Sean. And you advocate for human connection in an increasingly isolated world, citing neuroscience showing that trust and mutuality literally light up the brain, the heart,
Hmm.
your endocrine system, and bring about healthier states. When did you last experience that kind of connection at work, and what condition made it possible?
Well, I think of this as something as an imperative. Um, I think everybody can agree that trust is a good thing, and everybody likes to think that they're a trusted person. Um, but trust is a much deeper phenomenon, and it's a neurobiochemical phenomenon as well. And so, some of the one of my colleagues, he's a wonderful man named Paul Zak. He's a neuroscientist who's responsible for probably most of us knowing about the neurochemical oxytocin. They call it the love chemical. And what he shows that in high trust companies, I don't have the exact numbers at my fingertips, but people are twice as productive. The rates of burnout are far less. People are more creative. The retention is much higher. And if you think about it just as in your own personal life, you could be have a great relationship with somebody, but if there is a betrayal, we've all experienced that where suddenly we just shut off. We're not interested. We protect ourselves. And so when that environment around us, when we know that our fundamental cares and needs are not going to be met, where if we say something, somebody might penalize us for it. These are the conditions that neurologically shut us off and disconnect us from each other. And anybody listening to this also can appreciate that sometimes if you're going through a tough time, and I say, well, who's that one person you go to when you feel like this? You can think of somebody. Why? Because there's this open channel of connection where you can speak to them, they can hear it. Now, what I'm not saying is that everybody has to be sitting around a drum circle and singing kumbaya at work, but there's a responsibility that each person plays and a part that they play in creating the conditions for keeping that channel of communication open and not shutting each other off. Because when you have those conditions, the focus of the business becomes about self protection instead of coming together to work on the business itself. It's a very profound shift, and the companies who put effort and time to this become more resilient. They retain people longer. Their employees are their best advocates. And those businesses are the ones that are able to navigate complexity and change and the challenges in the marketplace much better.
Definitely. So you contrast traditional performance metrics with the behavioral and capability indicators that reveal true team intelligence. If you stop measuring output and started measuring collective capability, what would you learn, Mr. Sean?
This is a tricky topic, right? Um, there's
Hmm.
the famous saying that to measure what matters, right? And I think we all know that. And while metrics
Definitely.
are important and metrics are uh, you need things in reality to go by, sometimes what's most important does not lend itself to easy measurement. And I think I think Microsoft Excel was introduced in the 80s. And maybe that's hard for us to appreciate the shift in our awareness when it's so commonplace to have everything that fits into a nice spreadsheet and have our percentages on everything. And we sometimes confuse the menu for the meal. We think that the numbers in the spreadsheet are the reality, and we miss the person in front of you. So a lot of these things, like the ephemeral connection between people, doesn't fit into a spreadsheet very easily. So what I encourage people to do is great, have your metrics, but how do you establish the behaviors and the ways of acting that are going to produce the best results amongst your team. Because for the people who are actually performing, they don't need to look at a report. You can sit a group of people down and say, how are we functioning? Are we living up to the values and agreements that we said would give us the best performance, or are we having obstacles to that? How well are we honoring the vision that we had for how this team was going to function? So sometimes those reports and sometimes the presentations and all those things are the safe area because they're distant, but they actually disconnect us from what's going to be most important for our performance.
So, Mr. Sean, you describe the compound effect accelerating learning, expanding capability, attracting talent, competitive advantage, or resilient adaptation. Which of these benefits would transform your organizations most dramatically, and what's the cost of not achieving it?
Well, I think all of those are very important, right? And I think right now, as things in the world are changing very fast, and the role of course, artificial intelligence is changing things, I don't know if any one of those becomes the single item that's going to be the fundamental difference. What I do know is that when humans are put under stress and are being asked to go through a lot of change, that triggers the part of the brain that gets self-protective. We can call it fight or flight, or putting into survival mode. But it's hard to get people to think up new ideas or see new opportunities or test new ideas or collaborate in a way that's going to give you those breakthrough moments. So what I think what's most important during these periods of time is kind of back to that rafting analogy. Am I working with my people in a way that we're actually able to work through this together, or are we shutting down and losing people along the way? Because it's my personal opinion that people have become more and more stressed out, dealing with more and more mental health challenges. COVID obviously had a huge impact on this. And now, with some of the changes we're seeing out in the world, I don't know if people can be expected to just suck it up and continue to work harder doing more of the same. I think, especially with the dawn of artificial intelligence, we have an opportunity to actually rediscover what is uniquely amazing and differentiating about human intelligence versus our large language models. And I think those who seek to amplify that are going to have the competitive advantage where other people simply don't know how to adapt.
So, Mr. Sean, to wrap up our discussion for today, whether you build the infrastructure to create predictive intelligence systematically, if you started today, what would the first structure you'd put in place to surface team dynamics before they become crisis?
Yeah. So predictive intelligence is a tricky word, right? A lot of people think about, again, we're trying to predict the future out there. What's most important is how we as the team are looking out. Are we seeing the same reality? Are we surfacing things that can contribute to the other person? Because a lot of the answers that people have for the future simply will not be true. But if you can coordinate collective attention and develop collective understanding of the moment, then you can continue to navigate, test, iterate, and adapt moving forward. Those who don't do it, I wish them well.
We wish them well. Yes, definitely. And beautifully articulated, Mr. Sean. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your business, your projects, or anything you want to promote on Abstract SI?
Sure, sure. Thank you for that. So, Friction to Flow Consulting is our consulting company. And if you're interested in learning more about teamwear and team flow architecture, you can go to getteamwear.com. It's GETTEAM WARE. And there's a free guide. You can download it and learn more. And then if you want to connect on LinkedIn, I'm there as well.
Yes, people, let's connect with Mr. Shaun, because if you connect, for sure, we're producing our great leader in our generation to come. So, Mr. Shaun, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate being here.
More to come, people. See you soon.